Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some additional identification. The flight attendant's voice carried that particular tone of polite suspicion that every frequent traveler recognizes. Rebecca Hamilton stood over seat 2A, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against her tablet as she stared down at the woman who had just settled into the premium leather seat. Keisha Johnson looked up from her laptop, her expression calm but alert. At 34, she had learned to navigate these situations with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of a saint. She wore a simple black blazer over a white blouse, her natural hair pulled back in a professional bun that had taken her 20 minutes to perfect that morning. Her carry-on bag, a sleek leather briefcase that had been a gift from her law school classmates when she graduated summa cum laude from Georgetown, sat perfectly positioned in the overhead compartment. Nothing about her appearance suggested anything other than a successful professional traveling on business. But Rebecca's eyes had already made their assessment. Young black woman, traveling alone, sitting in first class. In her 8 years as a flight attendant, she had developed what she considered a keen eye for passengers who might be traveling on fraudulent tickets or using stolen credit cards. The mental algorithm was swift and, she believed, usually accurate. Something didn't add up in her calculations. "Is there a problem with my boarding pass?" Keisha asked, holding up the document that clearly showed Seat 2A, First Class, Phoenix Sky Harbor to Atlanta Hartsfield Jackson. The paper was crisp, freshly printed at the kiosk just 20 minutes earlier when she had arrived at the airport after a grueling 3-day deposition in a discrimination case involving a Phoenix-based construction company. Around them, the other first-class passengers were settling in for the 3-hour flight. A businessman in 1A was already on his phone, making deals, his voice carrying the confident tone of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. An elderly white couple in 3A and 3B were discussing their dinner plans in Atlanta, debating between their grandson's favorite restaurant and the new steakhouse they had read about in Southern Living magazine. None of them had been asked for additional identification. Their right to occupy their seats had been assumed rather than questioned. Rebecca examined the boarding pass like she was studying a potentially counterfeit bill, holding it up to the light and running her finger along the edges as if checking for proper texture. "Ma'am, our system shows this seat was purchased with a promotional upgrade. I just want to verify everything is in order." The lie hung in the air between them like smoke from an extinguished match. Keisha's trained legal mind immediately recognized the fabrication. Her ticket had been purchased at full price 3 weeks earlier, business class, paid for by Southwest Airlines' own corporate account through their legal department's travel authorization system. She had the confirmation email, the credit card statement, and the corporate travel approval all stored in her phone. "I'd be happy to show you my confirmation email," Keisha offered, pulling out her phone with deliberate calm. She'd learned long ago that anger in these situations only made things worse, providing justification for even more discriminatory treatment. Documentation and professionalism were her weapons of choice, honed through years of courtroom battles and corporate negotiations. But Rebecca wasn't interested in confirmation emails. Her supervisor had recently warned all crew members about increased fraudulent travel, particularly involving upgraded seats. The warning had been accompanied by a list of red flags to watch for, and while skin color hadn't been explicitly mentioned, the implications had been clear to those who chose to see them. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see your credit card, the one used to purchase this ticket." The request sent a ripple of awareness through the first-class cabin. Passenger in 4B, Laura Stevens, a middle-aged white woman traveling to Atlanta for her daughter's wedding, glanced up from her magazine. She'd been watching the interaction with growing discomfort. In her 52 years of regular business travel as a marketing executive for a Fortune 500 company, she'd never once been asked to produce her credit card after boarding a flight. The request seemed both unusual and somehow weighted with implications she didn't want to examine too closely. "Rebecca," said Captain Robert Miller, emerging from the cockpit with the measured stride of someone accustomed to command. At 48, he carried himself with the authority that comes from 15 years of commanding commercial aircraft and the unquestioned respect of his crews. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his uniform pressed to regulation perfection, his shoes polished to a military shine. Behind him, First Officer Sandra Gable was reviewing the flight plan, preparing for their 2:15 p.m. departure. "Captain, I'm just verifying this passenger's ticket. There seems to be some confusion about her seat assignment." Captain Miller looked at Keisha with the quick assessment of someone accustomed to making rapid decisions under pressure. He had learned to read situations quickly, to identify potential problems before they became crises. Young black woman in business attire, sitting calmly in first class while being questioned by his crew. His conclusion was swift and, unfortunately, wrong. The captain's assumptions were shaped by 15 years of dealing with passengers who attempted to upgrade themselves without authorization, who argued about seat assignments they hadn't paid for, and who created disruptions that delayed flights and complicated his carefully managed schedule. In his experience, legitimate first-class passengers didn't get questioned by his crew unless there was a legitimate reason. "Ma'am, if there's an issue with your ticket, we need to resolve it before departure. I can't have passengers in seats they haven't paid for." Keisha felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with these encounters. The assumption that she didn't belong. The burden of proof that never seemed to apply to passengers who looked different from her. The weight of representing not just herself, but every black woman who would face similar treatment in the future. She had experienced variations of this scenario 17 times in her professional career. Hotels that questioned her reservation confirmations. Restaurants that seated white customers with later reservations before her. Retail stores where security guards followed her through the aisles while ignoring white shoppers. Each incident had taught her something about maintaining dignity while fighting systematic bias. "Captain Miller," she said, reading his name tag, "I have my boarding pass, my ID, and my confirmation email. What additional verification do you need?" But Captain Miller had already made his decision. His schedule showed an on-time departure in 18 minutes, and passenger verification issues typically took at least 20 minutes to resolve properly. Better to handle this on the ground than to risk a delay that would cascade through the afternoon's flight schedule. "Rebecca, call the gate agent. Let's get this sorted out properly." In seat 5A, businessman Derek Wilson pulled out his phone and started recording. As a black man who traveled frequently for his consulting firm, specializing in diversity and inclusion training for Fortune 500 companies, he recognized the situation unfolding in front of him. He'd experienced similar treatment on 3 different occasions in the past 2 years, including one incident where he had been asked to move from first class to economy despite having a valid ticket. Derek's consulting work had made him acutely aware of the patterns of discrimination in corporate America. He understood how unconscious bias operated, how it influenced decision-making even among well-intentioned people, and how documentation was essential for creating accountability. His phone's camera captured not just the immediate interaction, but the reactions of other passengers, the body language of the crew, and the entire context of the unfolding situation. The gate agent's voice crackled through Rebecca's headset. "Gate control, this is flight 1247. We have a passenger verification needed at seat 2A. Within minutes, Ashley Peterson, the gate supervisor, boarded the aircraft. At 34, she'd worked for Southwest Airlines for 8 years, steadily climbing from baggage handler to customer service representative to supervisor. She prided herself on maintaining order and preventing fraudulent travel, skills that had earned her recognition from management and the respect of her colleagues. Ashley's training had emphasized the importance of thorough verification when passenger documentation seemed questionable. The airline industry had been dealing with increased fraud attempts, particularly involving stolen credit cards and identity theft. Her job was to protect the company from financial losses while maintaining customer satisfaction, a balance that required careful judgment and strict adherence to verification protocols. "What seems to be the problem?" Ashley asked Rebecca, not addressing Keisha directly. The slight was subtle but unmistakable, treating Keisha as a subject to be discussed rather than a customer to be served. "Passenger in 2A claims to have a legitimate first-class ticket, but something seems off about the booking." Ashley turned to Keisha with practiced authority, her voice carrying the tone of someone accustomed to handling difficult situations. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step off the aircraft so we can verify your travel documents properly." The request sent a murmur through the first-class cabin. This was beyond unusual. It was unprecedented. Laura Stevens in 4B lowered her magazine completely, her discomfort now turning to alarm. Derek Wilson in 5A held his phone higher, making sure he captured everything. The businessman in 1A looked up from his phone call, frowning at the disruption to the pre-flight routine. In seat 6A, Dr. Patricia Williams, a psychology professor at Arizona State University, traveling to a conference on implicit bias, watched the scene with professional interest and personal dismay. She had spent her career studying exactly this type of situation, documenting how unconscious prejudices influenced behavior in institutional settings. Seeing it unfold in real time was both validating her research and breaking her heart. "On what grounds?" Keisha asked calmly. "I've shown my boarding pass and identification. Both documents are valid and match." Ashley's expression hardened. She had been trained to handle passenger resistance firmly but professionally. In her experience, legitimate passengers didn't argue with verification procedures. Their compliance usually came quickly and without question. "Ma'am, we have the right to verify any passenger's documentation when there are questions about ticket validity. You can cooperate or you can be removed by security." The threat hung in the air like a blade. Every passenger in first class understood the implications. In the post-9/11 world, being removed from an aircraft by security could result in placement on no-fly lists, criminal charges, and lifetime bans from commercial aviation. The power dynamic was absolute, and everyone knew it. Keisha stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. She gathered her laptop and briefcase with the careful precision of someone who had learned that any sudden movement could be misinterpreted as aggressive or threatening. Her law school training had included extensive instruction on maintaining composure under pressure, and her courtroom experience had taught her the value of strategic patience. As she walked toward the aircraft door, she pulled out her phone and made a quick call. The conversation was brief, her voice too low for most passengers to hear. "Yes, this is Keisha Johnson. I'm going to be delayed. We have a situation that needs immediate attention." Derek Wilson, still recording, caught fragments of the conversation. "Legal department, discrimination incident, document everything." The businessman in 1A, now fully focused on the unfolding drama, started taking notes on his phone. As a senior executive with experience in crisis management, he recognized this as the kind of incident that could become a major corporate crisis if handled poorly. His notes captured not just the immediate events but the broader context, crew behavior, passenger reactions, the systematic nature of the discrimination. Dr. Williams in 6A was also taking notes, her academic training automatically analyzing the power dynamics, the racial implications, and the institutional responses she was witnessing. This was a real-time case study in everything she had been teaching her students about systemic discrimination. Ashley escorted Keisha off the aircraft and into the gate area where a small crowd of passengers waiting for other flights had begun to notice the commotion. Several people had their phones out, documenting what appeared to be a routine passenger removal. Social media had created a culture where unusual events were automatically recorded and shared, often without understanding their full context or implications. But Keisha Johnson wasn't a routine passenger, and this wasn't a routine removal. At the gate podium, Ashley began her standard verification process. She had handled hundreds of similar situations over her 8 years with Southwest, though she would later struggle to remember any that had involved white passengers being removed from first class for document verification. "Ma'am, I need to see your ID, credit card, and booking confirmation." Keisha placed her driver's license on the counter. Georgia license, Atlanta address, expiration date 3 years away. The photo matched perfectly, the hologram was authentic, and the magnetic strip showed no signs of tampering. Everything was completely legitimate. The license told a story of success and stability. The address was in Buckhead, one of Atlanta's most prestigious neighborhoods. The license had been renewed promptly, suggesting someone who managed their responsibilities carefully. But Ashley barely glanced at these details, focused instead on moving through her verification checklist. Now your credit card. Keisha reached into her briefcase and withdrew a corporate credit card. The card was platinum level, suggesting high spending limits and corporate backing. The name on the card read, Southwest Airlines Corporate Account. K. Johnson, authorized user. Ashley stared at the card for a long moment. Something about it looked familiar, but she couldn't quite place why. The Southwest Airlines logo was clearly visible, along with the corporate account designation that indicated this was issued to a company employee for business travel. Ma'am, whose card is this? It's my corporate card. I work for the company that issued it. Ashley's training had covered corporate fraud schemes, including situations where employees used company credit cards for unauthorized personal travel. But the verification process for corporate cards was different, requiring confirmation through the company's travel department rather than traditional credit verification. Which company? Keisha looked directly at Ashley, her expression unchanged. Southwest Airlines. The words hit Ashley like a physical blow. She looked from the credit card to Keisha's calm face, then back to the credit card. The implications began to cascade through her mind like falling dominoes. You work for Southwest? I'm Senior Legal Counsel for Southwest Airlines, Employment Law Division. I specialize in discrimination cases. The gate area had gone completely silent. Passengers who had been focused on their phones or conversations were now staring at the unfolding drama. The revelation had transformed what appeared to be a routine verification into something unprecedented. Derek Wilson, who had followed them off the plane, still recording, moved closer to capture Ashley's reaction. His live stream, which had started with 200 viewers, was now approaching 1,000 as word spread through social media networks. Ashley's face had gone pale. Her hands were shaking slightly as she held the corporate credit card. Around them, the crowd was pressing closer, sensing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. There must be some mistake. Keisha reached into her briefcase again and pulled out her business card holder. She selected one card and placed it on the counter next to her corporate credit card. Keisha Johnson, Senior Legal Counsel, Southwest Airlines, Employment Law and Civil Rights Division. The business card was embossed with the Southwest Airlines logo and included her direct phone number, email address, and Atlanta headquarters office location. The title, Employment Law and Civil Rights Division, seemed to glow under the fluorescent gate area lighting. Ashley stared at the business card like it might disappear if she blinked. Around them, the crowd was murmuring. Someone in the back called out, "Did she just say she works for Southwest?" Laura Stevens, who had gotten off the plane to see what was happening, pushed through the crowd. "Excuse me, but I was sitting in first class and watched this entire thing." This woman showed her boarding pass and ID immediately. She was completely cooperative. Dr. Williams also emerged from the aircraft, her academic interest now combined with moral outrage. "I'm a psychology professor, and what I just witnessed was a textbook example of racial profiling. This woman was singled out solely because of her appearance." Derek Wilson, still recording, addressed his phone camera. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing is a Southwest Airlines employee being discriminated against by her own company. This is unbelievable." His viewer count had jumped to over 2,000 as the live stream gained momentum across social media platforms. Comments were pouring in faster than he could read them, a mixture of outrage, disbelief, and calls for accountability. Ashley's radio crackled. "Gate 47, what's the status on Flight 1247? We're showing a departure delay." Ashley ignored the radio. She was staring at Keisha's business card, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. Her supervisor's training had included extensive instruction on handling customer complaints, but nothing had prepared her for discriminating against the company's own legal counsel. "Ma'am, Ms. Johnson, I didn't realize—" "Realize what?" Keisha asked calmly. "That I might actually belong in the seat I paid for?" The question cut through the gate area like a blade. Everyone present understood the implication. The assumption had been that a young black woman couldn't legitimately afford or deserve a first-class seat. The reality was that she not only deserved the seat, but she also worked for the company that provided it. Captain Miller appeared at the gate, having left his aircraft to see what was causing the delay. The flight was now running 12 minutes late, and his crew was getting restless. Passenger delays were manageable, but extended ground delays could cascade through the entire afternoon's schedule. "Ashley, what's the situation? We need to get back on schedule." Ashley handed him Keisha's business card without saying a word. Her hands were trembling slightly as she passed it over. Captain Miller read it twice. His face went through several expressions: shock, confusion, and finally, recognition of impending disaster. 15 years of airline experience had taught him to recognize potential crisis situations, and this had all the hallmarks of a company-ending catastrophe. "Ms. Johnson, I apologize for the confusion. Let's get you back to your seat immediately." But Keisha didn't move. She had spent her entire legal career learning when to accept apologies and when to demand systematic change. This was clearly a moment for the latter. "Captain Miller, I think we need to have a broader conversation about what just happened here." She pulled out her phone and dialed a number from memory. The call was answered on the first ring. "Kevin Mitchell's office. This is Keisha Johnson. I need to speak with Kevin immediately. We have a code red situation at Phoenix Sky Harbor." The mention of the CEO's name sent another ripple through the crowd. This wasn't just an employee calling a supervisor. This was someone with direct access to the highest levels of corporate leadership. Within 30 seconds, Kevin Mitchell, CEO of Southwest Airlines, was on the line. Keisha put the call on speaker so everyone in the gate area could hear. "Keisha, what's happening?" "Kevin, I'm standing in the gate area at Phoenix Sky Harbor. I was just removed from Flight 1247 because your crew didn't believe I belonged in the first-class seat I purchased with our corporate account." Silence on the other end of the line. In his 23 years with Southwest Airlines, Kevin Mitchell had dealt with numerous customer service crises, but nothing quite like this. "They questioned my boarding pass, demanded to see my credit card, and removed me from the aircraft for additional verification. This entire incident has been recorded by multiple passengers and is likely already being posted on social media." Derek Wilson's live stream had indeed gone viral. His viewer count had jumped to over 5,000 in the past few minutes, with shares and comments spreading the story across multiple social media platforms. Major news outlets were starting to pick up the story through their social media monitoring systems. "Dear God," Kevin's voice came through the speaker. "Keisha, I am so sorry. This is completely unacceptable." Captain Miller was staring at the phone like it was about to explode. Ashley looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Around them, passengers were holding up their own phones, recording the real-time corporate crisis management. "Kevin," Keisha continued, "I need you to understand that this isn't just about me. This is about the systematic assumptions your employees make about passengers based on their appearance. It's about the training failures that led to this incident. And it's about the legal liability Southwest now faces. Her legal training had taught her to think systematically about problems, to identify root causes rather than just addressing symptoms. This incident wasn't an isolated failure by individual employees. It was evidence of systematic bias in company culture and training protocols." Derek Wilson's live stream chat was exploding with comments. "They're getting fired in real time. This is the best plot twist ever. Southwest stock is going to tank. She played the long game perfectly. This is better than Netflix." Kevin's voice came through the speaker with barely controlled panic. "Keisha, what do you need from me right now?" Keisha had spent years preparing for moments like this. Her legal expertise, combined with her understanding of corporate dynamics, had given her a unique perspective on how to create systematic change rather than just individual accountability. First, I need a public acknowledgement from Southwest that this incident was discriminatory and unacceptable. Second, I need immediate corrective action regarding the employees involved. Third, I need a commitment to comprehensive bias training for all customer-facing staff. Ashley found her voice. Ms. Johnson, I was just following protocol. Keisha turned to her calmly. Ashley, what protocol requires you to question a passenger's boarding pass when they've already presented valid documentation? Ashley stammered. Well, when something seems unusual. What seemed unusual? A black woman in first class? The question hung in the air like a blade. Everyone in the gate area knew the answer, but Ashley couldn't say it out loud. The truth was too uncomfortable, too revealing of the unconscious biases that had driven her actions. Dr. Williams stepped forward from the crowd. As a psychology professor who studies implicit bias, I can tell you exactly what seemed unusual. The cognitive dissonance between seeing a young black woman and expecting to see someone who belonged in first class. This is a classic example of unconscious racial profiling. Her academic credentials gave weight to her analysis, providing an expert perspective on what everyone had witnessed. The crowd murmured in agreement, understanding that they had seen something significant beyond just a customer service failure. Kevin's voice came through the speaker again. Keisha, I'm authorizing whatever actions you deem appropriate. Full authority to handle this situation as you see fit. Keisha looked around the gate area. At least 60 people were now watching, most of them recording. Derek Wilson's live stream was approaching 8,000 viewers. This was no longer a private conversation. It was a public reckoning with systematic discrimination. Kevin, I'm going to need you to join this conversation by video call. The passengers here deserve to see Southwest's leadership taking immediate action. Within 2 minutes, a tablet was brought to the gate area and Kevin Mitchell appeared on screen. As CEO of Southwest Airlines, he commanded immediate attention. His presence changed the entire dynamic of the situation from a local customer service issue to a corporate leadership moment. Ladies and gentlemen, Kevin began, addressing the crowd that had gathered, I want to personally apologize for what you've witnessed here today. The treatment of Ms. Johnson is completely contrary to Southwest's values and policies. Derek Wilson held his phone higher, making sure his live stream captured both Kevin on the tablet and the crowd's reaction. His audience was now approaching 10,000 viewers, with the story spreading across Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. What you've seen is unacceptable discrimination, and I want to assure everyone that we will take immediate and comprehensive action to address this incident and prevent future occurrences. Laura Stevens stepped forward. Mr. Mitchell, I was on that plane. I watched your crew question this woman's right to sit in a seat she had paid for, while never questioning any of the white passengers. This wasn't confusion. This was profiling. Kevin nodded grimly. Ma'am, you're absolutely right, and I appreciate you speaking up. Dr. Williams added her voice to the conversation. Mr. Mitchell, from an academic perspective, this incident represents systematic bias in your company's culture. Individual training won't be sufficient. You need institutional change. Keisha addressed the tablet camera directly. Kevin, I want to be very clear about something. This incident isn't unique. As Employment Law Counsel, I've handled 17 similar cases in the past 2 years. This is a pattern, not an anomaly. The revelation sent a murmur through the crowd. 17 cases. This wasn't an isolated incident of poor judgment by individual employees. This was systematic discrimination occurring regularly throughout the company. Furthermore, Keisha continued, our own internal data shows that minority passengers are questioned about their ticket validity at 3 times the rate of white passengers, despite having identical documentation. She pulled out a folder from her briefcase. Her legal training had taught her to always come prepared with data and documentation. Southwest Airlines discrimination complaints filed with the Department of Transportation in 2024. 89 incidents. That's 34% higher than the industry average. The crowd pressed closer, trying to see the documents she was holding. Customer satisfaction ratings for minority passengers, 2.8 out of 5. Overall customer satisfaction, 3.6 out of 5. The gap indicates systematic disparities in service quality. Kevin's image on the tablet showed him taking notes frantically. Keisha, I wasn't aware the numbers were that significant. Kevin, that's part of the problem. These incidents are being handled as isolated customer service issues rather than components of a larger pattern of discrimination. She pulled out another document. Annual cost to Southwest from discrimination-related settlements and legal fees. $2.3 million in 2024. That's up 67% from 2023. The financial implications hit the crowd like a physical blow. This wasn't just about moral imperatives. It was about massive corporate liability and financial risk. A businessman who had been listening to the exchange stepped forward. Ms. Johnson, what would constitute an appropriate resolution from Southwest's perspective? Keisha looked around the gate area, at the passengers still recording, at Derek Wilson's live stream that now had over 12,000 viewers. She understood that this moment represented an unprecedented opportunity to create systematic change. First, immediate implementation of comprehensive bias training for all Southwest employees, not online modules. In-person, scenario-based training conducted by external experts. Kevin nodded on screen. Agreed. Second, establishment of an independent review board for discrimination complaints with external oversight and public reporting. Also agreed. Third, creation of a passenger bill of rights specifically addressing equal treatment with clear consequences for violations. Kevin paused. Keisha, that could expose us to significant legal liability. Kevin, your current legal liability is already significant. There are over 12,000 people watching this conversation live. Your stock has probably already started declining. Your choice is between controlled transparency and uncontrolled crisis. Derek Wilson, still streaming, addressed his audience. Chat, she's not just a lawyer, she's their lawyer. She knows exactly how to handle this situation from both sides. The comments in his live stream were reaching a fever pitch. This is the best thing I've ever seen on live TV. She's destroying them with facts and logic. Southwest is getting schooled by their own employee. This is going to be a business school case study. Kevin's legal team could be seen whispering urgently in the background of his video call. He nodded to them, then addressed the tablet camera. All conditions accepted. Implementation begins immediately. The crowd at the gate erupted in applause. Several passengers were wiping away tears. This was justice in real time, systematic change happening before their eyes. But Keisha wasn't finished. There's one additional requirement, Kevin. I want real-time implementation, not promises. Changes implemented within 48 hours. That's impossible, protested a voice from Kevin's legal team off camera. Union agreements, system updates, legal reviews. Keisha interrupted. Kevin, when weather emergencies require schedule changes, Southwest can reorganize your entire operation in 4 hours. When you have the will, you have the way. Kevin leaned back in his chair, recognizing the truth in her statement. Airlines were remarkably efficient at implementing changes when motivated by immediate operational necessity. What specifically do you need in 48 hours? Ashley Peterson and Captain Miller terminated within 24 hours. Rebecca Hamilton assigned to mandatory bias training with external evaluators. Comprehensive training materials developed and deployed within 48 hours. Captain Miller stepped forward. Ms. Johnson, I accept full responsibility for my actions. I should have verified your documents properly instead of making assumptions. Keisha looked at him with something approaching respect. Captain Miller, accountability is the first step toward change, but individual accountability isn't enough. We need systematic change. She turned back to the tablet. Kevin, I also need quarterly reviews with independent auditors to track progress. Full transparency, public reporting. Agreed. Derek Wilson's live stream had reached 15,000 viewers. Major news outlets were starting to pick up the story. Southwest's stock price, which had been stable all morning, had dropped 2.1% in the past hour. "There's one final element," Keisha said. "Executive accountability. A portion of senior leadership compensation should be tied to measurable improvements in equal treatment outcomes." Kevin's expression tightened. This was hitting directly at executive wallets, the most sensitive nerve in corporate America. "What percentage?" 15% of executive bonuses tied to diversity and inclusion metrics, quarterly assessments, public reporting. The legal team in the background was having an animated discussion. Kevin muted his microphone for 30 seconds, then returned. "Agreed." The gate area erupted in sustained applause. Laura Stevens was crying. Dr. Williams was shaking her head in amazement. Derek Wilson was struggling to keep up with the comments flooding his live stream. "Ladies and gentlemen," Keisha addressed the crowd, "I want to thank you for your patience during this delay. More importantly, I want to thank those of you who spoke up when you witnessed unfair treatment. Change happens when people refuse to be silent bystanders." She looked directly into Derek Wilson's phone camera. "For everyone watching this live stream, remember that discrimination thrives in silence. Document it, report it, speak up about it. Your voice matters." Kevin's voice came through the tablet speaker. "Keisha, I'll have the implementation timeline to you within 2 hours." "Thank you, Kevin. Now, I believe Flight 1247 was supposed to depart 67 minutes ago. Shall we get these passengers to Atlanta?" As the crowd began to disperse, several passengers approached Keisha. The dynamic had completely shifted. She was no longer a questioned passenger, but a recognized leader who had just transformed corporate policy in real time. Laura Stevens was first. "Ms. Johnson, thank you for handling that with such grace and professionalism. I've never seen anything like it." "Laura, thank you for speaking up. Bystander intervention is crucial for creating change. You could have stayed silent, but you chose to use your voice." Derek Wilson ended his live stream after addressing his 18,000 viewers. "Chat, I don't think I've ever witnessed anything like this. One woman just changed an entire airline's policies in real time on live television." The businessman who had been taking notes introduced himself. "Ms. Johnson, I'm William Harper from Harper Consulting. What you just did is going to become a case study in crisis management and corporate accountability." Dr. Williams approached with her academic perspective. "Keisha, this was a masterclass in strategic activism. You combined legal expertise, corporate knowledge, and media savvy to create systematic change. My students are going to study this for years." A young black woman who had been watching from the edge of the crowd stepped forward. "Ms. Johnson, I'm Jasmine Carter, a law student at Arizona State. Watching you handle this situation has inspired me to focus my studies on civil rights law. You showed me what's possible when you combine preparation with courage." Keisha smiled at Jasmine. "The law is a powerful tool for creating change, but it requires strategic thinking and persistent advocacy. Never let anyone tell you that you don't belong in any space you've earned the right to occupy." As Keisha finally boarded Flight 1247 and settled into Seat 2A, she reflected on the 67 minutes that had just transformed not only her own situation, but potentially the experience of thousands of future passengers. The other first-class passengers looked at her with a mixture of awe and respect. The businessman in 1A introduced himself as Robert Gable, a venture capitalist. "Ms. Johnson, what you just accomplished was remarkable. You turned a personal injustice into systematic reform." The elderly couple in 3A and 3B, Harold and Margaret Foster, apologized for not speaking up during the initial incident. "We should have said something when we saw how you were being treated," Margaret said. "Your example has shown us that silence enables discrimination." Flight attendant Maria Rodriguez, who had replaced Rebecca Hamilton for this flight, approached Keisha's seat. "Ms. Johnson, I want you to know that the entire crew has been briefed on what happened. We're committed to ensuring you have an excellent flight experience." Keisha appreciated the gesture, but was focused on the bigger picture. "Maria, this isn't about my individual experience anymore. It's about creating a culture where every passenger receives equal treatment. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. Emergency board meeting called. All departments head to conference room A immediately upon your arrival in Atlanta. Keisha smiled slightly. The real work was just beginning. Flight 1247 pushed back from the gate 75 minutes late, but it carried more than passengers to Atlanta. It carried the promise of systematic change, the power of documented discrimination, and the proof that individual courage could create institutional transformation. During the flight, Keisha's phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, colleagues, and civil rights organizations. The story was spreading rapidly across social media and traditional news outlets. By the time they reached cruising altitude, Yesker Southwest discrimination was trending on Twitter with over 50,000 tweets. Laura Stevens, sitting across the aisle, leaned over. "Keisha, how do you feel about this becoming such a public story?" "Laura, transparency is essential for accountability. If we had resolved this privately, nothing would have changed for other passengers. The public nature of the incident is what created the pressure for systematic reform." Dr. Williams, who had been upgraded to first class as a gesture of goodwill, added her perspective. "From an academic standpoint, this incident demonstrates how individual acts of courage can become catalysts for systematic change when combined with strategic thinking and public documentation." Derek Wilson, also upgraded to first class, was still monitoring social media reactions. "The story has been picked up by CNN, NBC, ABC, and BBC. Your live stream moment has become international news." As they flew over New Mexico, Keisha used the flight time to prepare for the emergency board meeting awaiting her in Atlanta. She pulled out her laptop and began drafting a comprehensive reform proposal that would transform Southwest's approach to diversity and inclusion. The document she created during the 3-hour flight would later become known as the Johnson Protocol, a systematic approach to eliminating discrimination in corporate settings. It included detailed timelines, measurable metrics, accountability structures, and implementation strategies based on her years of legal experience and her understanding of Southwest's corporate culture. 6 hours later, Keisha Johnson sat in Conference Room A at Southwest Airlines Atlanta headquarters, surrounded by the company's senior leadership team. The room, typically used for quarterly planning sessions and major strategic decisions, had been hastily converted into a crisis management center. Kevin Mitchell sat at the head of the table, flanked by the Chief Operating Officer, Margaret Foster, the Head of Human Resources, Lisa Rodriguez, and the entire legal department. The atmosphere was tense, filled with the urgent energy that accompanies corporate emergencies. The incident at Phoenix Sky Harbor has been viewed over 89,000 times across various social media platforms, reported Director of Communications Sandra Lee. "We're trending on Twitter with Southwest discrimination, but the overall sentiment is shifting positively because of the immediate response and transparency," Kevin nodded. Understanding that social media sentiment could make or break a company's reputation in hours. "What's our stock position?" Chief Financial Officer Robert Gable consulted his tablet, his expression grim. "Down 3.2% immediately after the incident, but recovering. We're currently down only 1.4%. The market responded positively to the swift action and transparency. The financial impact was significant but manageable. What concerned the leadership team more was the long-term reputational damage and the potential for copycat incidents if systematic changes weren't implemented immediately." Keisha had spent the flight preparing a comprehensive presentation. Now she stood at the front of the room, her laptop connected to the main display screen. The confidence she displayed was the result of 15 years of legal practice and intimate knowledge of Southwest's corporate structure. Ladies and gentlemen, what happened today wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of systematic issues that have been building for years. Her first slide showed a data visualization of discrimination complaints across the airline industry, with Southwest's numbers highlighted in red. Southwest ranks fourth highest among major carriers for discrimination complaints per passenger mile. We're not the worst, but we're far from the best. COO Margaret Foster leaned forward, her expression concerned. Keisha, what's driving these numbers? Unconscious bias in customer service, inadequate training protocols, and lack of accountability for discriminatory behavior. Keisha clicked to the next slide. But the good news is that systematic problems have systematic solutions. The presentation she had prepared was comprehensive, drawing from her legal expertise, her understanding of corporate psychology, and her analysis of successful diversity initiatives at other major corporations. She outlined a comprehensive reform program, mandatory bias training for all employees, revised customer service protocols, independent oversight of discrimination complaints, and regular auditing of service quality across demographic groups. The cost of implementation, $4.7 million over 18 months. The cost of maintaining the status quo, $2.3 million annually in legal settlements, plus immeasurable damage to brand reputation and customer loyalty. The numbers were stark and compelling. Chief Financial Officer Gable was taking detailed notes, already calculating the return on investment for systematic bias prevention. Kevin studied the numbers carefully. What's the timeline for implementation? Phase 1 begins tomorrow morning. Emergency bias training for all Phoenix Sky Harbor staff. Phase 2 starts Monday. System-wide policy changes. Phase 3, comprehensive training rollout over the next 6 months. Head of Human Resources, Lisa Rodriguez, raised her hand. Keisha, how do we measure success? Quantifiable metrics, reduction in discrimination complaints, improvement in customer satisfaction scores among minority passengers, increase in employee reporting of bias incidents they witness, and decreased legal liability. Keisha clicked to her next slide, showing proposed metrics and benchmarks. But the most important measure of success will be qualitative, when passengers like me can travel without having to document every interaction for potential legal proceedings. The room was silent for a moment as the leadership team absorbed the implications. They were looking at a complete transformation of company culture, driven by one incident that had exposed systematic problems. Kevin stood up, his decision already made. Keisha, you have my full authority to implement this program. Whatever resources you need, whatever changes are necessary, make it happen. As the meeting continued for another 2 hours, Keisha outlined specific implementation strategies, accountability measures, and reporting structures. The Phoenix Sky Harbor incident had given her unprecedented leverage to implement changes she had been advocating for years. As the meeting adjourned, Keisha's phone buzzed with a call from an unknown Phoenix number. Ms. Johnson, this is Rebecca Hamilton. I was the flight attendant on your flight today. Keisha stepped into the hallway to take the call privately, her professional instincts telling her this conversation could be significant. Ms. Johnson, I wanted to apologize directly. I was wrong to question your boarding pass, and I was wrong to make assumptions about whether you belonged in first class. Rebecca, I appreciate your call. What matters now is learning from this incident and ensuring it doesn't happen to other passengers. Rebecca's voice was shaky, filled with genuine remorse. I've been assigned to bias training, and I wanted you to know that I'm taking it seriously. I never want to make another passenger feel the way I made you feel today. Rebecca, your willingness to acknowledge your mistake and commit to change is exactly what this process is designed to achieve. The goal isn't punishment, it's prevention. After ending the call, Keisha walked to her office window overlooking the Atlanta skyline. Her phone showed 47 missed calls from reporters, 134 text messages from colleagues and friends, and 1,047 LinkedIn connection requests. But what mattered most was the email from her assistant. Training materials approved by Executive Committee. Implementation begins tomorrow morning at Phoenix Sky Harbor. Change was happening in real time, faster than she had imagined possible. The next morning, Southwest Airlines made unprecedented moves. Ashley Peterson and Captain Miller were terminated within 18 hours of the incident, exactly as Keisha had demanded. The termination sent a clear message throughout the company that discriminatory behavior would have immediate consequences. Rebecca Hamilton was enrolled in intensive bias training with Dr. Cheryl Thompson, one of the nation's leading experts on unconscious bias in customer service. The training was comprehensive, involving role-playing exercises, psychological assessment, and ongoing supervision. At Phoenix Sky Harbor, every Southwest employee received emergency training on equal treatment protocols. The training wasn't perfunctory. It was intensive, scenario-based instruction that forced employees to confront their own unconscious biases. Derek Wilson's original live stream video had been viewed over 250,000 times. News outlets around the world were covering the story as an example of how individual courage and corporate accountability could create systematic change. But the most significant development was happening behind the scenes. Southwest's legal department was conducting a comprehensive audit of discrimination complaints, customer service protocols, and employee training materials. Within 72 hours, Keisha Johnson had become a national figure. Her handling of the discrimination incident had captured public attention in a way that few corporate controversies ever did. CNN's Anderson Cooper invited her for a primetime interview. Ms. Johnson, you've been praised for turning a personal incident into systematic change. How did you know how to handle such a volatile situation? Anderson, my legal training taught me to think systematically about problems. Individual incidents are usually symptoms of larger issues. When you address the systems, you prevent thousands of future incidents. The interview was watched by 3.2 million viewers and shared extensively on social media. Keisha's calm, professional demeanor and her focus on systematic solutions rather than personal grievances resonated with audiences across demographic lines. NBC's Today Show followed with a feature story on corporate discrimination and individual activism. The segment included interviews with passengers who had witnessed the incident, expert analysis from discrimination law professors, and commentary from corporate executives about the broader implications. Dr. Williams, the psychology professor who had witnessed the incident, became a frequent media commentator. What made Keisha's response so effective was her combination of legal expertise, strategic thinking, and moral courage. She didn't just demand individual justice, she created systematic change. The Phoenix Sky Harbor incident had consequences far beyond Southwest Airlines. Other major airlines began reviewing their own discrimination policies and training protocols, recognizing that they could face similar public scrutiny. American Airlines announced new bias training for all customer service employees within 2 weeks of the Southwest incident. Delta implemented revised passenger verification protocols that emphasized equal treatment regardless of appearance. United created an independent review board for discrimination complaints. The Department of Transportation launched a comprehensive review of discrimination complaint procedures across the airline industry. Transportation Secretary Maria Gonzalez announced new federal guidelines requiring airlines to track and publicly report discrimination incidents. Corporate America took notice. Companies across industries began implementing similar transparency and accountability measures, recognizing that discrimination incidents could become viral news stories within minutes. 3 months later, Keisha Johnson stood at the podium of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People's annual Transportation Equality Conference in Washington, D.C. The auditorium was packed with 1,500 attendees, civil rights lawyers, airline executives, government officials, and transportation industry professionals. 3 months ago, I was questioned about my right to sit in a first-class seat I had purchased with my own company's corporate account, she began. Today, I want to share what that incident taught us about systematic change and the power of strategic activism. She clicked to her first slide, showing discrimination complaint statistics across the airline industry. Since the Phoenix Sky Harbor incident, discrimination complaints against Southwest Airlines have dropped by 73%. But more importantly, complaints across the entire industry have decreased by 28%. The audience murmured appreciatively. This wasn't just about one company's improvement. It was about industry-wide transformation catalyzed by a single incident of documented discrimination. This happened because we approached discrimination as a systematic problem requiring systematic solutions, not as isolated incidents requiring individual punishment. Her next slide showed Southwest's new training protocols, which had been adopted by 6 other major airlines and were being studied by transportation companies worldwide. When you change systems, you change outcomes. When you change outcomes consistently, you change culture. During the Q&A session, a young black woman in the audience stood up. "Ms. Johnson, I'm Diana Washington, a law student at Howard University. Your case inspired me to focus my studies on employment discrimination law. What advice do you have for young lawyers who want to create change?" Keisha smiled, remembering her own law school days and the professors who had inspired her commitment to civil rights. "Diana, learn the business side of law, not just the legal side. Understand how companies make decisions, how they measure success, and how to align moral imperatives with business incentives. That's where lasting change happens." An airline executive from American Airlines raised his hand. "Ms. Johnson, what would you say to companies that argue bias training is expensive and difficult to implement?" "I'd show them the numbers," Keisha replied. "Southwest's investment in bias training was $4.7 million. Our annual savings from reduced discrimination complaints, improved customer satisfaction, and enhanced brand reputation, $7.2 million. It's not just the right thing to do, it's the profitable thing to do." The business case for equality was compelling, and corporate executives in the audience were taking detailed notes. After her presentation, Keisha was approached by Transportation Secretary Maria Gonzalez. "Ms. Johnson, your case provided the momentum we needed to implement new federal guidelines requiring airlines to track and publicly report discrimination complaints. The regulations go into effect next month." Keisha nodded. Secretary Gonzalez, transparency is the foundation of accountability. When companies know their discrimination statistics will be public, they're much more motivated to improve them. That evening at the conference dinner, Keisha received the NAACP's Transportation Equality Award. In her acceptance speech, she reflected on the broader impact of that day at Phoenix Sky Harbor. "Change doesn't require protests or lawsuits or public shaming," she told the audience. "It requires documentation, leverage, and systematic thinking. Most importantly, it requires people who refuse to accept discrimination as normal." She looked out at the audience of advocates, lawyers, and industry professionals. Every person in this room has experienced or witnessed unfair treatment. Your stories matter. Your documentation matters. Your voice matters. Don't just watch injustice happen. Document it, report it, demand accountability. The audience gave her a standing ovation that lasted 4 full minutes. 6 months after the Phoenix Sky Harbor incident, Derek Wilson, the businessman who had live-streamed Keisha's confrontation with Southwest staff, was invited to speak at a digital marketing conference about the power of real-time social media advocacy. "That day, I was just another passenger trying to get to Atlanta," he told the audience of 200 marketing professionals. "But when I saw discrimination happening in real time, I decided to document it." That live stream has now been viewed 1.8 million times across all platforms. He showed the conference attendees analytics from his stream, engagement rates, viral spread patterns, demographic data about his viewers, and the measurable impact on Southwest's stock price and corporate policies. But the most important metric isn't views or shares, it's a change. That live stream contributed to policy changes that have improved the travel experience for millions of passengers. During the Q&A, a social media manager asked, "Derek, what advice do you have for people who witness discrimination but aren't sure whether to get involved?" "Document everything," Derek replied. "In today's world, accountability happens in real time. Your phone is a tool for justice. Use it responsibly, but use it." After his presentation, Derek was approached by a young black woman named Jasmine Davis. Mr. Wilson, I was discriminated against on a United flight last month. I saw your Southwest video, and it inspired me to document my experience and file a complaint. United has now changed its passenger verification procedures. Derek smiled. That's exactly why we need to speak up. One incident of documented discrimination becomes a catalyst for systematic change. 1 year after Flight 1247, Harvard Business School published a comprehensive case study titled Strategic Activism and Corporate Transformation, the Southwest Airlines Discrimination Incident. Professor Michael Gable, who authored the study, wrote, "The Johnson case represents a masterclass in strategic activism. By combining legal expertise, corporate knowledge, media savvy, and moral courage, Keisha Johnson transformed a personal injustice into systematic corporate reform." The case study was adopted by business schools across the country, teaching future executives about crisis management, stakeholder activism, and the intersection of social justice and business strategy. MBA students analyzed the incident from multiple perspectives: corporate governance, public relations, legal liability, financial impact, and social responsibility. The consensus was that Keisha's strategic approach had created a template for effective corporate activism. Georgetown Law School also developed a case study for their civil rights curriculum, focusing on how legal expertise could be leveraged to create systematic change beyond traditional litigation. 1 year after Flight 1247, Southwest Airlines published its first annual Diversity and Inclusion Report. The statistics were remarkable and represented the most significant transformation in the company's history. Discrimination complaints down 76%, customer satisfaction among minority passengers up 39%, employee reporting of witnessed bias incidents up 178%, customer retention rates among diverse passengers up 31%, legal costs related to discrimination down 68%. But the numbers that mattered most to Keisha were qualitative. Letters from passengers who had traveled without incident, employees who felt empowered to speak up about bias, and other companies that had adopted Southwest's training protocols. The Phoenix Sky Harbor incident had become a catalyst for change that extended far beyond the airline industry. Companies in hospitality, retail, healthcare, and financial services had implemented similar systematic approaches to preventing discrimination. 2 years later, Keisha Johnson was promoted to Vice President of Legal Affairs and Chief Diversity Officer for Southwest Airlines. Her first initiative in the new role was the creation of the Southwest Equality Institute, a training center that provided bias education for transportation companies across the United States. The institute was housed in a state-of-the-art facility in Atlanta, featuring simulation labs where employees could practice customer service scenarios, lecture halls for theoretical instruction, and research facilities for ongoing study of discrimination patterns and prevention strategies. The institute's first graduating class included 300 employees from 18 different airlines, 12 bus companies, 22 ride-sharing services, and 15 hotel chains. The curriculum they learned had been developed from the lessons of that day at Phoenix Sky Harbor. During the graduation ceremony, Keisha addressed the graduates with a message that had become her signature theme: discrimination is not inevitable. It's the result of systems that haven't been designed to prevent it. When we change systems, we change outcomes. When we change outcomes consistently, we change culture. And when we change culture, we create a world where everyone can travel with dignity. In the audience that day was Rebecca Hamilton, the flight attendant who had questioned Keisha's boarding pass 2 years earlier. After completing extensive bias training and working as a diversity consultant, Rebecca had been rehired by Southwest and was now one of their most effective trainers for bias awareness. Her transformation from perpetrator to advocate had become a powerful example of personal growth and institutional change. Rebecca's training sessions consistently received the highest ratings from participants, who appreciated her honest acknowledgement of her mistakes and her commitment to preventing others from making similar errors. After the ceremony, Rebecca approached Keisha. "Ms. Johnson, I want to thank you again for giving me the opportunity to learn and grow from my mistakes. I've now trained over 600 Southwest employees, and every session starts with the story of Flight 1247. Keisha smiled. "Rebecca, your willingness to acknowledge your bias and work to prevent others from making the same mistakes is exactly what this movement needs. You've become an advocate for change." The transformation was complete. What had begun as an incident of discrimination had become a movement for systematic equality that was changing an entire industry. 3 years after Phoenix Sky Harbor, the Department of Transportation released its annual report on airline discrimination. The statistics showed industry-wide improvements that could be traced directly to the changes implemented after Keisha's case. Discrimination complaints across all major airlines, down 47% customer satisfaction among minority passengers, up 33% employee bias training completion rates, up 94% corporate investment in diversity initiatives, up 156%. But the most significant change was cultural. Passengers who experienced discrimination were now more likely to report it, document it, and demand accountability. Airlines had learned that discrimination incidents could become viral news stories within minutes, creating immediate financial and reputational consequences. The incident that had delayed Flight 1247 by 75 minutes had ultimately improved the travel experience for millions of passengers worldwide. European airlines began implementing similar transparency and accountability measures. The European Union created new anti-discrimination guidelines for all member airlines. Australia established an independent oversight board for transportation equality. Canada mandated bias training for all federally regulated transportation companies. The ripple effects continued to spread across continents and industries, proving that individual acts of courage could create global transformation when combined with strategic thinking and systematic implementation. Keisha often reflected on that day at Phoenix Sky Harbor, the moment when Rebecca Hamilton had asked for her credit card, the assumption that she didn't belong in first class, the 75 minutes that had changed everything. But what she remembered most was the moment when she had decided not to just accept the discrimination quietly, the moment when she chose to document everything, demand accountability, and use her platform to create systematic change. That decision had transformed not just her own experience, but the experiences of countless passengers who would never know her name but would benefit from the systems she had helped create. In her office at Southwest headquarters, Keisha kept a framed photo from that day at Phoenix Sky Harbor. It showed her standing at the gate podium, surrounded by passengers, with Derek Wilson's phone camera capturing everything for his live stream. Below the photo was a simple inscription: "Change happens when ordinary people refuse to accept discrimination as normal." Every day, as she worked to build more equitable systems and policies, Keisha was reminded that individual acts of courage could become catalysts for systematic transformation. The lesson of Flight 1247 had spread far beyond the airline industry. Companies across America had learned that discrimination wasn't just a moral issue. It was a business risk. Employees had learned that they had the power to speak up and create change, and passengers had learned that they didn't have to accept unfair treatment silently. 5 years after the Phoenix Sky Harbor incident, Keisha Johnson was invited to deliver the keynote address at the International Transportation Equality Summit in Geneva, Switzerland. Representatives from 52 countries had gathered to discuss best practices for eliminating discrimination in global travel. 5 years ago, I was removed from an airplane for the crime of sitting in a seat I had purchased while being black, she began, addressing the Assembly of Transportation Ministers, airline executives, and civil rights advocates. Today, I want to share what that experience taught us about the power of documentation, the importance of systematic change, and the possibility of transforming entire industries through individual acts of courage. Her presentation included data from airlines around the world that had adopted the Southwest model of bias training and accountability measures. The results were consistent across cultures and continents. When companies implemented systematic approaches to preventing discrimination, incidents decreased dramatically. The lesson of Flight 1247 is simple, Keisha concluded. Discrimination is not inevitable. It's the result of systems that allow it to flourish. When we change those systems, we change outcomes for millions of people. During the Q&A session, the Transportation Minister from the United Kingdom asked, "Ms. Johnson, what would you say to countries where discrimination in transportation is still considered a minor issue?" Keisha's response was direct. "I would show them the economic data. Southwest Airlines' investment in equality initiatives has generated a 425% return through reduced legal costs, improved customer satisfaction, and increased brand loyalty. Discrimination isn't just morally wrong, it's economically inefficient." After her presentation, Keisha was approached by Amina Hassan, a young lawyer from Kenya who was working to eliminate discrimination in African aviation. "Ms. Johnson, your case has inspired similar activism in Nairobi. Last month, a prominent businesswoman documented her discriminatory treatment on Kenya Airways. The incident went viral, and the airline was forced to implement new training protocols." Keisha smiled. "That's exactly how change spreads. One documented incident becomes a catalyst for systematic reform. Your work in Kenya is part of a global movement." Back in Atlanta, Derek Wilson continued to receive messages from people who had been inspired by his live stream to document their own experiences with discrimination. His original video from Flight 1247 had been translated into 31 languages and was being used as a training tool by civil rights organizations worldwide. Rebecca Hamilton's consulting firm, Dignity First Training, had grown to employ 47 consultants and worked with transportation companies across North America. Her transformation from perpetrator to advocate continued to inspire both employees and executives. "Every training session I conduct begins with the story of Flight 1247, Rebecca told a reporter from Transportation Weekly. "I use my own mistakes as a teaching tool to help other employees recognize and overcome their unconscious biases." Laura Stevens, the passenger who had witnessed the initial discrimination and spoken up in support of Keisha, had become a leading advocate for bystander intervention training. She regularly spoke at conferences about the importance of speaking up when witnessing discriminatory treatment. Too often, people see discrimination happening and remain silent because they don't want to get involved, Laura told audiences. But silence enables discrimination to continue. When we speak up, we create accountability. Dr. Patricia Williams had published a book titled Flight 1247, How One Incident Changed an Industry, which became required reading in psychology and business ethics courses across the country. 10 years after Flight 1247, Southwest Airlines published a comprehensive case study documenting the long-term impact of the Phoenix Sky Harbor incident. The data showed sustained improvements across all metrics. Discrimination complaints had remained 78% below pre-incident levels for 7 consecutive years. Customer satisfaction among minority passengers had increased by 44% and remained consistently high. Employee confidence in reporting bias incidents had increased by 189%. Most importantly, Southwest had become the industry leader in diversity and inclusion, with other airlines regularly seeking to learn from their practices. The economic benefits had been substantial. Southwest's reputation for equal treatment had become a competitive advantage, particularly among diverse customer segments. Their market share had increased by 15% over the decade, with customer surveys consistently rating their commitment to equality as a key factor in airline selection. But the impact extended far beyond Southwest's bottom line. The incident had catalyzed changes throughout the transportation industry and had influenced corporate policies across multiple sectors. Over 300 companies had adopted variations of the Southwest model for addressing discrimination, immediate accountability, systematic training, independent oversight, and public transparency. The incident had also influenced legislation. The Equal Treatment in Transportation Act, passed by Congress 8 years after Flight 1247, required all federally regulated transportation companies to track and publicly report discrimination complaints, implement bias training for customer-facing employees, and establish independent review processes for discrimination incidents. Keisha Johnson, now 44 and serving as Southwest's chief legal officer, had been recognized as one of the most influential corporate leaders in America. Her approach to combining legal expertise with business strategy had become a model for other executives seeking to create systematic change within their organizations. But when asked about her legacy, Keisha always returned to the fundamental lesson of that day at Phoenix Sky Harbor. "The most important thing wasn't that I stood up for myself," she said during a recent interview with Harvard Business Review. "It was that I used my platform and resources to create systematic changes that would benefit everyone who came after me." She paused, reflecting on the decade of transformation that had followed. Individual acts of discrimination are symptoms of systematic problems. When we address the systems, we prevent thousands of future incidents. That's where lasting change happens. The reporter asked, "What advice would you give to someone facing discrimination today?" Keisha's response was immediate and firm. "Document everything. Know your rights. Use whatever platform you have, whether it's social media, legal action, or simply speaking up in the moment. And remember that your individual experience can become a catalyst for systematic change that benefits countless others." As she spoke, Keisha thought about the thousands of letters she had received over the years from passengers who had traveled without incident because of the changes implemented after Flight 1247. Travelers who would never know her name but who had benefited from the systems she had helped create. 15 years after Phoenix Sky Harbor, Keisha Johnson announced her retirement from Southwest Airlines to focus full-time on the Johnson Institute for Transportation Equality, which had expanded to become a global nonprofit organization promoting anti-discrimination practices across all industries. During her farewell address to Southwest employees, she reflected on the journey that had begun with a simple question about her boarding pass. 15 years ago, I was asked to prove that I belonged in a seat I had purchased," she told the assembly of 3,000 Southwest employees. "Today, no passenger should ever have to prove their right to equal treatment." She looked out at the diverse audience of employees representing dozens of ethnicities, backgrounds, and experiences. "You are the guardians of the culture we've built together. Every interaction you have with passengers is an opportunity to demonstrate our commitment to dignity and equality. Never forget that your individual actions contribute to a systematic commitment to justice." The audience gave her a standing ovation that lasted 9 minutes. After her retirement from Southwest, Keisha's work expanded to include consulting with governments, international organizations, and multinational corporations seeking to eliminate discrimination from their operations. Her methodology, refined over 15 years of implementation, had become the global standard for systematic anti-discrimination initiatives. The Johnson Protocol was being used by organizations on 6 continents to create cultures of equality and accountability. But despite her international recognition and influence, Keisha never forgot the lesson that had started it all. Individual courage could become a catalyst for systematic transformation when combined with strategic thinking and persistent advocacy. As Keisha cleared out her office at Southwest headquarters for the final time, she found the original business card she had given to Ashley Peterson that day at Phoenix Sky Harbor. The card was worn and faded, but the title was still clearly visible. Senior Legal Counsel, Employment Law Division. She smiled, remembering how that simple piece of cardstock had changed the entire dynamic of the situation. The moment when assumptions based on appearance had collided with documented reality. That collision had created a crack in the system of discrimination that had allowed millions of passengers to travel with greater dignity over the past 15 years. The lesson of Flight 1247 lived on in the policies, procedures, and culture of not just Southwest Airlines but of transportation companies around the world. It lived on in the federal legislation that required transparency and accountability. It lived on in the training programs that taught employees to recognize and overcome their unconscious biases. Most importantly, it lived on in the millions of passengers who traveled each year without experiencing the discrimination that had once been considered normal in the transportation industry. The transformation was complete, but the work of maintaining and expanding equality would continue. New generations of advocates would face new challenges and create new solutions, building on the foundation that had been established by one woman's refusal to accept discrimination as inevitable. The story of Flight 1247 had become more than a case study in corporate change management. It had become a testament to the power of individual courage to create systematic transformation, a reminder that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary change when they refused to accept injustice as normal. And in airports around the world, passengers of all backgrounds could board their flights knowing that their right to equal treatment was protected not just by laws and policies, but by a culture that had been transformed by the simple act of one person standing up and saying, "I belong here too." The journey that had begun with a question about a boarding pass had become a movement that changed how the world travels. And the lesson would continue to inspire future generations of advocates who understood that systematic change begins with individual courage, strategic thinking, and an unwavering commitment to human dignity. Change happens when ordinary people refuse to accept discrimination as normal. That was the lesson of Flight 1247, and it would continue to resonate long after the last passenger had boarded the last flight, creating a legacy of equality that would benefit travelers for generations to come. In the end, Keisha Johnson had done more than secure her right to sit in seat 2A. She had secured the right of every passenger to travel with dignity, regardless of their appearance, background, or circumstances. The 75-minute delay had become a catalyst for change that would benefit millions of people for decades to come. The story of Flight 1247 proved that individual acts of courage, when combined with strategic thinking and systematic implementation, could transform entire industries and create lasting change. It demonstrated that discrimination was indeed a choice, not an inevitability, and that ordinary people possessed the power to create extraordinary transformation when they refused to accept injustice as normal. As passengers around the world continued to board flights, ride buses, stay in hotels, and travel with dignity, they carried with them the legacy of one woman who had stood up, spoken out, and demanded better, not just for herself, but for everyone who would come after her. The lesson of Flight 1247 would endure. Change happens when ordinary people refuse to accept discrimination as normal.